So, my name is Shane, as Amanda just said a whole bunch of times. I am currently a third round intern with the Coral Restoration Foundation down here in the Florida Keys. We're based out of Key Largo, and we have another facility in Tavernier. So I graduated from Stony Brook University, which is up in New York. I graduated with a degree in marine vertebrate biology, but I initially actually went into college with a degree, the intention to get a degree in just regular old biology. While I was there, I actually took a trip abroad class to Jamaica. I did tropical marine ecology. It was about 2 weeks in Jamaica, diving, snorkeling, doing all that fun stuff. It was very fun to convince my mom to let me go and do that. But while I was there, I kind of realized like this is the kind of thing that I want to be doing for the rest of my life. This is kind of something that really, really interests me, and that's kind of where I made the decision, all right, I'm going to switch majors, and I'm actually going to really pursue marine biology, essentially. And then after graduation, or after the class rather, I spent some time working in a graduate marine lab, assisting graduate students in conducting research as they're attempting to get their master's degrees and PhDs and stuff like that. Spent a lot of time diving in about 5 feet of really murky water, collecting bags and bags of seagrass. So really exciting stuff. It was also about 60 degrees year round in that water, so very cold compared to Florida Keys. But after I graduated, I spent some time looking around and I actually found this internship. I have actually been here since January of this past year now, and I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit today about kind of the importance of what we are doing here, what we are actually doing here, and kind of a little bit of what we actually as interns and people do every single day down here in the Florida Keys. And so with that, I will just go ahead and get started. So for the past 500 million years or so, corals have actually persisted and dominated the shallow reef ecosystems, shallow water ecosystems around our planet. They really only appear in typically the warmer climates, so especially around the equator and places like that, but they have been around for a very, very, very long time. They've been around for about 4 times longer than since the dinosaurs went extinct. That was around 65 million years ago. So that's just a little reference in case 500 million years doesn't mean anything to you. They are one of the oldest and most biodiverse ecosystems on our planet, and some would argue that they are even more so than tropical rainforests. And they're not only biodiverse and just absolutely old, but they actually perform a lot of very critical ecosystem services to our planet and to our oceans. Unfortunately, however, most of the coral reefs these days are looking like this. This is what we see a lot of down here in the Florida Keys. This is a coral graveyard. All of these things that you're seeing right here, these are all skeletons. These are all dead remains of what was once a nice, big, healthy coral colony. Today, they are one of, if not the most threatened habitat on Earth, with many, many species of different animals, including coral, facing extinction. In the last 40 years or so, we have seen, specifically down here in the Florida Keys, the Florida Reef Tract has lost about 97% of the once dominant staghorn and elkhorn species. These are 2 species that we focus primarily on down here at CRF. And worldwide, this is something that is really just beginning to really start kicking in. We've seen the entire world lose about 50% of its reefs in just the last 30 years. And it is predicted that within the next 80 years, all shallow water coral reefs could become extinct. It's really a very serious imminent problem that we are facing, and that we're just starting to see. The state that the Florida Keys was in probably 30, 40 years ago is what we are actually starting to see out on the Great Barrier Reef these days. This is kind of just the start of what could potentially be the same fate for them out there that we've experienced down here. And just as a perfect example, we're going to show you Carey's Fort. This is one of the most popular reef sites down here in the Upper Keys especially. It has been and still is kind of considered the crown jewel of the Florida Keys. This is what Carey's Fort Reef looked like back in the 1970s. What you see here is clean water, nice and clear, very blue, not a lot of stuff really clouding up that water. But more importantly, what you see is a huge field of elkhorn. This is elkhorn coral, and this is what it's supposed to look like. These colonies are standing probably 3 to 5 feet in height. You see a lot of fish and other things living. These structures provide habitat for these marine animals, and they really provide a number of services to the water quality as well as the planet that we'll get into a little bit as well. So this is what a nice, healthy reef looks like. This is what we want to see out there. These just fields and fields of staghorn and elkhorn. This is, again, elkhorn coral. We're going to fast forward to 2014. This is that same reef. As you can see, there is not a whole lot going on. Again, this is that coral graveyard. There's not a lot of coral that you can see. There's not really good blue, clear water quality going on. Like, it's still fairly clear, but you can see it's starting to get kind of cloudier and stuff like that. And there's not a lot of fish. There's one fish down in the center at the bottom that you can see, but he's on his way to another reef, honestly. There's really just not a whole lot going on. And this is, unfortunately, the way most of our reefs look today. And there's a number of different things that contribute to the decline of corals that have over the last 40 years. Things like direct human impact, whether it be uneducated divers and snorkelers, directly impacting the corals by stepping on them or kicking them or damaging them with their tanks, whatever it may be, to things like poor boating practices. So anchoring on these reefs will end up, if you drag your anchor across a reef, you'll end up tearing up hundreds and hundreds, maybe even thousands of years of growth and life in just a few seconds. So we have a lot of mooring balls down here that people will use instead. It's actually kind of a requirement rather than anchoring. And this helps to actually save those reefs and save those corals. We've also seen disappearance of herbivores, which has led to a shift in the overall dominating species of these shallow water coral reefs. So it used to be a lot of coral domination, but now what we've seen is a lot of algae domination. And the algae grows a lot faster than the coral. So what ends up happening is that the algae overgrows the coral and actually ends up suffocating it, so it just dies. And the reason the algae is doing so well is because disease wiped out the long-spined sea urchins back in the 1980s. And we've seen a lot of unregulated fishing occur of other herbivores, kind of like parrotfish and other animals that would actually scrape away and eat a lot of that algae. Other things that people don't really think about are development and pollution. So with development, especially back when the Keys were first really starting to get popular and people were building houses and stuff, what ended up happening is they took all the mangroves down, and those mangroves that were holding the sediment together ended up allowing a lot of nutrients and other things to run off into the ocean and cause a lot of sedimentation and algae growth as well, which again just basically suffocated the corals. And the last thing that we talk about for like local stressors are chemicals and sunscreen. This is something that's been a very hot topic lately. Things like avobenzone, octinoxate, these are all chemical spreaders. So basically all they do is they allow your sunscreen to really spread and absorb into your skin. There are studies that have been done to show that this is actually lethal to corals, especially to the little coral polyp babies that have formed, the little larvae that will swim around before settling. So we try to steer people away from those and switch to more mineral-based sunscreens that include things like zinc oxide and titanium dioxide. And everyone's favorite topic, the global stressor of climate change is something that has really begun to impact nearly everywhere, and especially now, it's becoming a much more talked about topic. There's been a lot more things on social media that you've seen, probably on news, but ocean acidification and ocean warming are two things that have contributed greatly to coral bleaching. If you didn't know, coral bleaching is basically when the relationship between the coral and an algae that lives inside it breaks down. The algae gets expelled from the coral's body and it turns white. Now that coral is still alive, but it is essentially starving. The algae usually gives corals about 90% of their energy. So when they are stressed, they get rid of that. They're no longer getting the nutrients that they need, and they can very quickly end up dying after that. But what I would like to point out is that big word right at the bottom. It says climate change is anthropogenic. All of these things are caused by humans. That is what that means. So unfortunately, with everything being caused by humans, it is our responsibility to all take action and try to fix the problems that we have made. Why should you care about coral reefs? I want everybody to kind of just picture their favorite ocean animal right now. Obviously, there's a whole lot of you, so I can't ask, but for example, my favorite is an octopus. I absolutely love octopus. They're incredibly smart. They have a lot of very interesting and unique behaviors, and they're very, very, very cool to see, especially when I'm diving anywhere tropical. The ocean is only covered by about 0.2% by coral reefs. There's not a whole lot of coral reefs that occupy the world, but more than 25% of marine species are supported by coral reefs. And that is a massive, massive number compared to the 0.2% that they actually occupy on our ocean floors. And And these could be anything from animals that directly live in these coral reefs, things like sea turtles, fish, whatever it may be, to animals that will migrate, and they'll stop along the reef to grab a snack on the way, to feed, to reproduce, whatever they may need to be doing. 25% of animals are supported, marine animals, excuse me, are supported by these coral reefs. And it's not just the animals that benefit from these coral reefs. There's a lot of very huge economic and other impacts that affect the humans, that affect us as well. A healthy coral reef, one of the biggest things that it does, especially as a barrier reef, is it protects the coastline from storms, from surge, and from damaging infrastructure. What you're seeing here on the top is a nice healthy reef. What you see is the waves are breaking and allowing a nice calm area between the reef and the shore. You're seeing those mangroves holding that sediment in place. You're seeing that nice fishing vessel able to collect a lot of fish because it's a nice healthy reef, so there's a lot of reduction, a lot of life still on there. You see a scuba diver down there. You see that the tourism industry especially is able to thrive with a healthy reef because people want to come and see the corals. They want to come see all the fish and all the things living on these reefs. On the bottom, however, is a degraded coral reef. Unfortunately, this is what we're seeing more of these days. So when we think about degraded coral reef, I'm talking about those 3 to 5 foot tall elkhorn colonies that we saw in the picture of Terry's Fort. Those 3 to 5 foot tall segments, those colonies, actually act as a barrier. They break the waves sooner as they come into shore. Without that barrier, the waves are getting further inland. They're damaging the mangroves and pulling all that sediment away. So we see that the water level starts to get closer inland to where housing and development is. They're going to really damage the infrastructure here. There's no structure to support the fishing industry because there's no longer any homes for the fish to produce and grow up. And the weather is terrible, so nobody wants to go snorkeling or diving. So there's a lot of different ways that coral reefs actually really impact our day-to-day lives down here. Now, I know that's a whole lot of really negative information, and that's unfortunately the state that our world is really in right now, but I'm going to bring things back a little bit. So here at Coral Restoration Foundation, we really try to do our best in putting corals back on the reef. There's a whole lot of things that really starts to influence and impact. When we restore a coral reef, what happens is we provide habitat for that marine life, that structure that we talked about. Reefs are home to over 1 million different species of marine organisms, and that is a whole lot. It supports the tourism and diving industry, as we talked about briefly. It can, people want to be able to see all the cool things. People come down and spend a ton of money down here to go just snorkeling and diving, and it supports a whole lot of livelihoods. And it's the same thing for the fishing industry. Having this structure where fish can actually grow and reproduce and supply the ocean with fish, essentially, contributes directly to a lot of livelihoods in that field as well. And not only that, but we also protect the coastline when we are restoring these reefs. And long-term, very, very long-term, coral reefs do help to regulate carbon dioxide levels. So that's the very short, brief version of the kind of impacts that we have by restoring these coral reefs. So Coral Restoration Foundation, I'm going to talk a little bit about us now, is one of, if not the largest nonprofit marine conservation organizations in the world dedicated to restoring coral reefs to a healthy state, specifically in Florida right now, but we have a lot of partnerships around the world. And so we really are trying to share this knowledge and everything that we've done globally. Our core mission, of course, is to restore the coral reefs, to educate others, and to use science to further coral research and coral reef monitoring techniques. These are kind of our 3 main pillars of what we do here. The 3 of these, the restoration, the education, and the science, all depend on each other to allow this organization to really function. The restoration essentially basically is putting corals back on the reef, getting those numbers up and making sure we can outplant as much as we can. The education is what I'm doing today, being able to reach out to people like you guys who are learning, who are maybe unaware of some of the problems that we are facing, and really start to educate and hopefully inspire you guys to take action yourselves. And then the science, of course, is to make sure that we know what we are doing is working. Whole lot of different stuff that really works together to make sure that what we are doing is successful. So over the last, I think it's actually closer to 12 years now, over the last 12 years or so, CRF has really developed and paved the way for this new field. These are techniques and methods that can be used all around the world. And it's something that's really important that we understand is that This is a problem that we are facing globally, and it's not something that we try to compete with other people with. It is important that everybody has the knowledge and information to actually make an impact and be able to restore their own reefs and things like that. So we really try and share the knowledge and spread this information and do our best to help others try and fight the same fight that we are fighting. And that is where large-scale massive action comes in. We believe that in order to save the world's coral reefs, everybody's got to be involved. It's got to be more than just us down here. So as I mentioned, staghorn and elkhorn are two of the species that we focus on right now. To date, we have outplanted over 106,000 corals back onto the Florida Reef Tract. That is a whole lot of coral. We're starting to spread into more of some other species, including some of our boulder corals, but these two have been the primary focus of our efforts in the last 12 years or so. Both of these species are listed currently as critically endangered on the IUCN Red List, which basically means that they're just one step away from extinct in the wild. Initially, when we got our corals, what we did is we harvested little tiny pieces from living wild colonies down here in the Florida Keys, and we took advantage of a reproductive strategy there. It's called propagation. Basically, propagation or fragmentation. If a piece of the coral breaks off, it will continue to grow into an entire separate colony by itself. And we really take advantage of that. We have 7 different nurseries located throughout the Keys. Tavernier is our largest nursery. It has over 500 of our coral trees, which I'll talk about in a minute. And that means that we have about 30,000 corals and about an 1.5 acre space out in the water, about 3 miles offshore. And because we have so much coral, we have actually become kind of a arc for a lot of these different types of coral down here. We have tons of different genotypes. We have about 323, maybe more different genotypes of these corals that we have kind of preserved and kept that we are trying to return to the reef. And some of these genotypes can no longer actually be found in the wild. So this is our coral tree, as I just mentioned as well. These are one of the best methods for growing coral that has been recognized, and I'll explain why in a second too. But what I want you guys to do right now is I want you to each find a coral on this tree. Each of these is a little tiny coral colony that starts out just like a little tiny baby fragment. I like the one on the bottom left because it kind of looks like a chicken foot. I don't know if you guys found that one yet. But keep an eye on your coral, because here's the same tree in just 9 to 12 months. What you're seeing is the exact same tree, the exact same corals, with a crazy amount of coral colony growth on it. This is only 9 months later. The coral trees have been recognized as one of the fastest methods because essentially what it does is it allows the corals to grow and grow and grow uncompeted by anything else. They get great sunlight. We can adjust the height of the trees in the water so they can be in warmer or colder water. They're away from any competition, and they get really good water flow. So it's just an excellent way that we have found that we can actually grow coral out in the ocean. But the thing is it's not just one tree. You know, it's not just one tree that holds 60 corals, and it's not just a dozen trees, okay? It is an entire nursery, 500 trees. This is our Tavernier nursery, as I mentioned before. These 500 trees, each holding 60 corals, that is 30,000 corals in this small area. And that is a whole lot of coral. So much so that it's getting to the point that we really don't know what to do with it. We are really trying to ramp up our scale of everything that we do. And that means really just getting a whole lot going and bringing a whole lot of it back out onto the reef. So basically what we do is we go out into our nurseries and we harvest coral colonies by fragmenting small hand-sized pieces. We put them in these super high-tech milk crates. We bring them up to our boat and we bring them to one of our outplanting sites. Once we're there, everybody hops in the water. We lay the corals out and we start outplanting. That number is out of date. It's over 106,000 corals now. But basically, we attach them using a special marine epoxy in small groups that encourages fusion. As the corals grow and they come in contact with each other, they'll actually basically melt their skeletons together and become one big colony. And what we have seen is that it works, and we know it works. Through our science department, we do a lot of monitoring, so we make sure that we actually go back to our reef sites that we've outplanted on, and we check to see how those corals are doing. This right here is a photomosaic. This is an image, super high res, comprised of probably a couple hundred, maybe even thousands of pictures. And you can actually zoom in on each of these blue dots is an individual coral cluster, and you can actually zoom in on each individual cluster and see how it's doing. We have on average about a 77% survivorship rate across all our sites and species. And we have a lot of collaboration work that we do along with other organizations. to kind of see how our corals are doing and study other things like how they're impacting the environment as well. But this is the key thing about what we do. We have the restoration department getting all that stuff out there, but without science, without knowing that what we're doing is actually working, it doesn't really matter at the end. So again, that's kind of how these branches of our organization work together. And the best part is that these corals aren't just surviving out there, they're actually thriving. We have seen our corals actually start to spawn in as little as 2 years after being outplanted. Spawning is a huge energetically costly event. So the fact that our corals that we have outplanted are spawning means that they are doing very, 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 very well. So that is what we like to see. If you don't know what spawning is, basically once a year, all the corals will release gametes into the water at the same time to produce little tiny coral larvae, and those will hopefully eventually settle down onto a substrate and grow a new colony. So it's a very, very cool event. Here is Carey's Fort. These are elkhorn colonies just 2 years after being outplanted. And you can see old mortality. It's an old, big, dead elkhorn right at top there. And what we're seeing is that these areas are recovering. Ecosystem level recovery is possible. So that was a whole lot of information in a very short time. I'm going to talk very, very quickly about things that you guys can do in your everyday life that also will help make an impact on our oceans. Things like eating seafood. Everybody loves seafood, but you need to make sure that you know where you're getting it. The Seafood Watch app is excellent. It shows you where your sources of seafood are coming in, so you can make sure that they are being caught in a sustainable manner. You can also reduce your plastic consumption. Think about how much plastic you use in your life. Think about that coffee you went and got at Starbucks this morning. Did it come in a plastic cup? Do you have a reusable cup that you bring? Do you bring reusable bags when you go grocery shopping, or do your parents use them? Start to nag your parents to use less plastic. Do that for sure. But so just start thinking about how much plastic you use in your everyday life. Souvenirs are another big one, especially in places like this. People will go out and collect actual living animals, unfortunately, for their shells and everything like that, not realizing that there are still animals living in them, or sometimes realizing and not caring, and doing a whole lot of damage. It's really not good. So make sure you know where you're getting your souvenirs. We like to say in the dive world, take photos, leave bubbles. It's a very good model to live by. Sunscreen. We talked about sunscreen very briefly. Say yes to things that are safe mineral-based sunscreens, or opt not to use sunscreen at all. Cover up. When we go out on our boats, we look like a ragtag group of pirates. We have buffs up around our face, sunglasses, big hats, long sleeve shirts. Like the sun is basically just touching our hands and feet, and that's about it. So that's just one way that you can contribute. And of course, with the climate change movement, especially happening very recently, think about ways that you can get involved. A huge one is getting involved in local legislation, support policies and politicians who want greenhouse gas emissions to be reduced, who want to promote renewable energy, things like that. A whole lot of different ways that you guys can get involved. So be an ocean steward. Think about the choices that you make in your everyday life and really try and contribute to the health of our oceans. And of course, there's different ways that you can get involved with CRF as well. There's dive programs. If you're interested, you can go on our website and find them. If you guys are certified scuba divers, you can take a trip down here and you can actually do some hands-on work with us. You will actually get to go out to the nursery and outplant your very own coral clusters. I'm not gonna ask you guys to donate because you're a bunch of high school students and you're getting ready for college maybe. But we have CRF merch in our shops and stuff like that. But always consider donating to groups that you want to support, that are fighting the fight and doing good work. And you can keep in touch as well. We got a lot of really cool social media stuff. You can come visit us down here in the Florida Keys. And you can sign up for a weekly newsletter. All of this stuff can be found on our website at coralrestoration.org. And with that, I want to say thank you guys for listening. If you guys have any questions, I will attempt to answer them once I find where you guys went. There we are.
So we already have 2 questions in. The first one is, awesome. What made you choose your major in college?
So I've always been very drawn to the ocean. I've been very attached to just honestly the beach. I think it started very young when my mother brought me to the beach a lot. It's just been something that's always, kind of called to me. Not to turn to Moana here, but basically going into college, I thought of, kind of where I wanted to go afterwards, thinking about possible career paths. I decided that biology was probably a safer choice, more options afterwards. But after taking that trip in Jamaica, I realized, this is kind of really what I want to be doing, because it's something that is really not going to be considered work to me. It's something that I'm going to be able to get up every day and look at that I enjoy doing and want to be at work doing those kinds of things. So switching my major into marine biology was kind of just I don't want to say it was a no-brainer, but it was just one of those things where it was like, all right, I realize this is definitely the path that I want to go down to. And while it might be harder at some point, it's definitely going to be worth it in the long run.
So the second question is, how often do you go back into the water to check on the coral, and what's the money like in this industry?
Okay, I'll answer the second part first. The money in this industry is not spectacular. I will be 100% honest with you guys. It's definitely a very competitive field, and there's not a whole lot of open positions for these kinds of things. There's a lot of internships and other stuff that you can start to get involved with. But in general, there's not a whole lot of money in this field. Right now, I'm actually looking at different ways that I can supplement my income, whether it be other part-time jobs or different kind of, entrepreneurial-based endeavors or whatever it might be. But people aren't in this field for the money, and that is for sure. People are in this field because it's something that they're passionate about. It's something that inspires them. It's something that they want to do that makes an impact and makes a difference. And that's the best thing that I get out of this internship. I'm surrounded by people who want to be here every day, who want to be making an impact on our planet and helping fight the fight and help these coral reefs. So again, not really in it for the money, but that's a good question. For the first part, we have really ramped up our scale in outplanting. We've actually outplanted, I think we did over 30,000 corals just last year, as opposed to the first year where CRF was outplanting, where they outplanted 6 corals. So it's gotten a lot more complicated, but basically we try and get out there afterwards. After the outplant, we go back and monitor from 1 to 3 months. So we'll get out to that same transect 1 to 3 months after, and then 9 to 12 months after. So we try and monitor twice after they've been outplanted, once after a couple months, and then once after around a year.
How many degrees do you have, and does it pay to add more degrees?
I only have the 1 degree. In this field especially, there are a lot of desires for master's degrees and other things like that. But in my opinion, you can get a lot out of just having 1 degree still. There are definitely more opportunities and a more competitive edge to having higher degrees, such as a master's or a PhD for sure. But if you were going to get your PhD, make sure that you really kind of know what you want from it. With a PhD, you become kind of an expert in that field. So you have to really kind of know where you want to go in order to actually go for your PhD, in my opinion. But in terms of other degrees helping, my boss, for example, he didn't really know what he wanted to major in college. He took a bunch of classes that interested him, and then at one point, his guidance counselor said, all right, you need to pick a major and graduate. So he ended up with 2 degrees, one in environmental studies and one in theater studies. And then he had a minor in Asian culture studies. So he kind of basically took a very different route and kind of just had something thrown on him based on what he was interested in, what he took. And from there, he was actually able to build a very interesting and very cool career out of those degrees that he ended up with.
Do you ever feel hopeless with the declining state of the ocean and with the apathy of the public and government officials?
It's definitely hard not to get kicked down every once in a while, for sure. There's a lot of bad things happening in this world where people, try and point blame in other directions, and there's a whole lot of different stuff going on where you see a lot of just the negativity in social media and on the news and all of things like that. But it's the being here in person and actually fighting the fight and doing what we can to really impact that change that keeps me going. It's definitely tough at times, but it's being surrounded by the people with a similar mindset that keep me going every day. It's being surrounded by people who want to be here, who want to help, who want to fight. As the world changes and as people start to become more vocal about these issues, we're here fighting this fight to keep the corals on the reef while the water quality, while our world still has these problems that really caused the corals to disappear in the first place. So we get a lot of negativity sometimes of, why are you bothering if nothing else has changed yet? Why are you bothering putting these corals back in a place where they're just going to die? And the simple answer is, if we don't do anything, the corals will never have a chance to actually recover. If we don't do something to actually keep these corals on the reefs, then they're not going to get a chance to actually get back on the reefs as things start to change in the future. While other people are, fighting to change laws and make things more publicly known and aware, we are here trying to just hold down the fort basically and try and get as much work done as we can getting these corals back out, and hopefully within the next however many years things will start to shift and these corals will be able to recover by themselves.
Is there a way to work in your field without college? And what is the starting salary average?
That I'm not 100% certain on a whole lot of that. I would say starting salary for specific things would be very, very different. It depends on the organization you're working for. It depends where they get funding. We're working at a nonprofit, so the salaries here are not huge. I think a starting salary here might be $30,000, $35,000, $40,000, like at best. That's not a whole lot. Opportunities without college, sure. I would say that there are definitely always going to be opportunities for you to get involved without the education, but I will also say having the education has made a huge, huge, huge difference. It's hard to imagine anybody coming into this internship, for example, not having a whole lot of experience already kind of learning about the issues and learning about the climate and ecology and how things impact each other and how the actual animals all function. Invertebrate zoology was one of my favorite classes that I took in college, and it was a lab every week. It was 4 hours at a time. It was a whole lot of dissections and gross things, but I probably learned more from that class than any other class that I did. So while there are probably opportunities to get involved with organizations like this without the college degree, the degree definitely helps.
What can we do personally to stop pollution, and what have you changed in your behavior to stop pollution?
So big time, just kind of those things that I briefly talked about. There's a whole lot that you guys can do. One of my biggest things that I like to talk about is just the overall use of plastic. People do not realize how much plastic you use on an average day. It's something that really is just grossly irresponsible on all of our parts that we don't even realize that we're doing it. So get reusable shopping bags. I literally just bought 5 more it was literally $5 for 5 reusable shopping bags at Publix down here. So that will reduce your plastic consumption through plastic bags every time you go to the store. Look at what you're drinking every day. Do you go out for a drink and does it come in a plastic cup every once in a while? Get reusable cups, things like that. There's just a lot of different little ways that you guys can look at what you guys are doing every single day and really start to make that change. You can start participating in Meatless Monday. The beef industry is one of the biggest contributors for greenhouse gas emissions, actually. So starting to reduce your beef consumption is just an example of something that you can do every week to really cut down on your, carbon footprint. There's a whole lot of different things like that that you can do. I would recommend doing a little bit more research, finding out kind of things that really speak to you as a individual and things that you can start changing in your everyday life. And on top of that, harass your friends, harass your parents, start getting them to make that green initiative as well.
Have you ever come face to face with a shark, or what is your most memorable moment in the field?
Most memorable moment in this field specifically was probably the first time I actually outplaned for my own coral cluster. It was the first time I had been, actually I think it was like the third trip that we took down here when I started my internship. I actually put my 10 corals attached to the reef by myself, and it was just a very rewarding thing because I directly impacted this ecosystem. I put corals back on the reef with my own 2 hands. And as for the sharks, I did a dive in the Bahamas where basically the site was called the Shark Arena, first of all. We hopped in, we settled down on these little cement blocks, basically, like we pinned them between our knees to hold ourselves in place. And then a few minutes later, the dive master and the cameraman, who were both wearing chainmail suits, jumped in with a giant box full of bait. And we had probably around 30, 40, maybe even 50 Caribbean reef sharks swimming around us the whole time. Like close enough that they would bump into you with their fins and knock your regulator out of your mouth and get water in your mask and stuff like that. And that was a very, very, very cool experience.
So I know we're about to run out of time because bells are about to ring, but there's 2 questions remaining. The first one is, what advice would you give to someone wanting to enter the environmental field?
What advice would I give? Learn everything that you can, learn what you want, find things that impassion you, and really just go for what you are passionate about. Those are the things that are really going to spark your interest and keep your enthusiasm going and keep that passion in your life, because you want to be going down some path that you find interesting, because then at that point, it's not going to be an effort to actually have to work. It's just what you want to be doing every day.
And then it looks like we have a hand raised. So I'm going to try to unmute you, Ms. LaFontaine's class.
I'm making 12 bucks an hour. That was not going to cover any of it.
Your dream job. If my dream job makes 90,000,
Isn't a beekeeper your dream job?
Sure, if your dream job makes 90,000.
All right. I don't know if they could hear us. All right.